All right. Thank you all for being here. This is a very big group. I'm excited. My name's Jessica Newman. I know a lot of you know me because you're in my audio class, but I see a lot of faces that are not from our class, which is really exciting as well. So thank you guys for coming in. We are going to hear from Jason Villanueva today. He is the founder, owner, CEO, executive director, all of those titles.
All of them.
For Podcast Tables Shop and also Podcast Solutions. And he's going to tell you all about how he came to create both of these companies and what they do in the Wichita area. I had Jason come in and talk on a podcast panel back in 2018 or 19?
2019.
19?
Yeah.
Right, I know it was pre-COVID.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to have him back on campus. And he's also done some other things for us in between there, which I'll let you talk about.
Sure.
So he's just a great supporter of us in the Elliott School, and we're happy to have him here. We will have Q&A at the end. The only reason I have this mic is because we're recording it, so as you can tell, I'm not amplified. But when we do the questions, I will carry this around just so that on the recording we can actually hear your guys' questions. So if you have a question, just put your hand up, and I'll just kind of get the mic in your vicinity so we can hear you. Sound good? Okay, Jason, take it away.
Thank you so much. How's everybody doing? Good? Are you guys hungry or you ate already? You're hungry. All right. That helps me to know what to do with the crowd. So I kind of want to do something backwards. I would like to just give me maybe 3 people up front. Give me a question that you may have about podcasting up front, so then I can see if I can weave it into my presentation, but I will do Q&A at the end. So.
Sorry, I didn't know you were going.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just threw.
Set the mic down,
I know.
Jason.
I just messed you up on that
Here's
one.
a question.
Anybody? It's going to help me.
I know that you did our new Elliott School podcasting tables
Yep.
in our rooms. Why are they octagonal, like hexagon
Yeah,
shape?
that's a great question. I'll get to that. Yep, fantastic. You'll learn. You're gonna learn today. Isn't that a phrase?
Post-pandemic, you've seen a lot of pop-ups for like Dude Bro podcasts and just people just trying to get in that space. So I guess my question is, post-COVID, have you seen a boom on your end of things as far as pushing products goes?
Yeah, for sure. Yep, I'll hit post-COVID. One more over here.
What's the kind of equipment you would want to use to like get started? Like you don't know if you want to do this professionally or not. You just want to get some
yeah.
equipment in to see how it goes, kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. I love it. Fantastic. So a real quick thing on these questions, as you'll see tied in to my presentation today, is having come from podcasting, there were a lot of problems that I had to solve for myself. And what I essentially ended up doing was taking those solutions and then making a business out of them. And so that's kind of how I'm here today. So I'm Jason Villanueva. I grew up in Houston, Texas, but moved to Wichita about 13 years ago. So Wichita is home now. I'm representing Wichita. So it's home. I still love Texas, but I like Wichita better because when I go back to Houston, there's so many people in the city, it feels like somebody kicked an ant pile and humans came out, and they're just like everywhere. And so I like being in Wichita. It's a little more slower pace, not as many people, and I don't have any hair to pull out anymore, but I don't pull my hair out in traffic as much as I used to when I was in Texas. So love Wichita. It's my home now. So this first slide here, Podcast Table Shop delivers to WSU. And so we made a video of my business, Podcast Table Shop, delivering tables to Elliott School of Communication, which is really amazing. And so about, not this time last year, maybe December last year, I got an email from Jeffrey Jarman. You guys all know Jeffrey, maybe? Yes. He's your director of your school. And he said, hey, we're interested in your podcast tables. And I saw that, who he was with, Wichita State. And I was like, yes, that's awesome. Because at that time, I had not sold any table locally in Wichita. So it was one of my first local sales, essentially. WSU being one of my first local clients, which is really amazing. But it was interesting to me that when he found me, he said that he didn't realize that I was local. And it made me think about how my SEO, my Google search scenario has really served me with my podcast table shop and even with a couple of other websites that I'm going to show you. So I want to start there just to show the relevance. I love the school. I support what you guys are doing. I'm in communications. I'm in podcasting. I'm in marketing. And so I think that the area of expertise that you're seeking out has a lot of potential. There's potential for growth still. And with the way that we see media going, I'm just trying to figure out like what's next, because it's evolved over time. And so there's just a lot of opportunity for businesses, organizations, individuals, schools, all kinds of people and places to get involved in podcasting and continue to create media. And so one of the questions that people ask me all the time is, how did you get into podcast tables? And so I wanted to give a little bit of a history of the evolution of my journey into media creation, and then eventually ending up building podcast tables. But what I really want you to see along the way is that I think that what I'm going to talk to speaks to a greater idea at large, that there's a lot of opportunity in the space, but also the problems that I solved for myself became the businesses that I now live and run on a daily basis. And so I just want you to think about whatever it is you're figuring out for yourself could potentially be something that you can do for others and you can get paid for it. So just kind of keep that in mind. And so I started off as a podcaster. How did I get into building podcast tables? I started off as a podcaster. And so you know that phrase, start at the bottom, now we're here. This is my bottom. So this is me in a cold room on the third floor of a friend's church at a white plastic round table. We've got two Sennheiser E835 mics on some mic stands with XLR cables that are way too long, and a little USB recorder device going into my old Mac, into some, I think it was like PreSonus, I can't remember even what it was called. It was like Studio One or something like that. It was free at the time. It came with the recording device. And so you had asked about like, what do I use to get started? Well, that's what we used to get started back then, but there's a million answers to that question, and I actually have a website that'll help you. So this is us in this cold room, and we recorded our first podcast there. You see that? That is a space heater. And so I feel like this is just about as drab and as basic as you can get, saying, we're going to podcast. I heard someone talking about earlier when I walked in, they were just like, oh yeah, we've talked about maybe starting a podcast. And that's the phrase, you guys. If you're ever having a conversation with your friends or family or whatever, and that phrase comes out, we should start a podcast, like it happens. Does it happen to you? No? Nobody here? A couple of people? Yeah. It happens. Like you're having conversations, and that's what happened with my friend and I. I would drive him to work in the mornings, and we had about a 15-minute drive, and we'd get it into heated discussion. We're debating, going back and forth about stuff, and we're like, we should do a podcast. And so it was kind of born in the car, and then ended up at this round table here. But we started from the bottom, and then now we're here. This is where we ended up in the design of our table, with aesthetics and functionality, mic placement, grommet placement, outlets, panels to hide cables. I mean, it's very minimal, very clean, very sleek. And so being a podcaster and eventually evolving in having guests on and building out a studio and learning about recording and live streaming and all these things, we ended up building a studio for ourselves. And so along the way, I solved problems of how do I hide cables? How do I get power to the cable? How do I create a space for multiple people where then I can remove a section or add a section? So there's the answer to that question. And also, what's going to look good on video? How are we going to get different angles that's going to look good and maybe mimic what we see on a news station or ESPN Sports Radio or something like that? I need a drink, excuse me. So that's a little bit about where that started from. But being a podcaster, whoops, I feel like these aren't in order. I'm sorry. Give me a second. I know how to use computers, I promise. That's the one. We'll just do that. We'll go back and forth. So we started our own podcast, and it was called the Salty Dogs Podcast. And so if you know the phrase, you salty bro, we were salty. And so in the faith and spirituality space, we would have different conversations about religion and faith and life and love. And and all these different things. And it was me and my two buddies. And so this is an iteration of us trying to create something where we actually looked good on camera. This is our space. We put plants and lighting and a backdrop, and I built this table out of just cheap lumber, but you can see how we eventually evolved and upgraded to a switcher. It's the A10 Mini Pro. You guys familiar with that? Anybody here? Yeah. We got the camera switcher. We've got a multi-track mixer and all this stuff, and we upgraded our mics and our boom arms and all that stuff. And so we really we're trying to figure out how to make it look better, how to make it sound better. We're going live on Facebook, and so we're having to route all of that going live through OBS and all those different things. And so this is an iteration of what the studio looked like. And then this is one more iteration. So as you can see here, in that last picture, you had a white table. This table's got a black tablecloth on it. It's two of us. We have a different background. We turned the camera. So at first we used to have this like brick background, but then we upgraded it to wood, but then we had another background over here. So we had this fully functioning studio, but a lot of times things were moving and we're having to add stuff and take stuff away. And so again, a lot of problem solving during this evolution of our show, with going from two hosts to two hosts and a guest, or three hosts and a guest, and going live streaming them on Facebook, but then exporting, going to YouTube and cutting clips for Facebook. You guys familiar with this whole process, like how content creation is just this whole thing now? And so we were serving ourselves in learning how to do all this stuff. And so where we go from here is, having done that, I started that like in 2017 or 2018. We ended up ending that show in 2020, but it was around 2019, and this is when I first met Jessica. Having learned how to do all of that for myself, problem solving, watching YouTube, looking at reviews, spending hours and hours on Amazon and B&H Photo, reading reviews, checking specs, doing all this stuff, I realized I solved this problem for myself. You saw where we started, 2 mics at a table, and then we ended up in the studio with lighting and live streaming and multicam and a big mixer and all this stuff. And so I started very small, but then it got very intricate, or what's the word I'm looking for? Complicated, essentially very complicated. And I thought, if I taught myself to do this, well, then I can probably teach others how to do this. And so you're just seeing pictures of the equipment and the aesthetics and all that stuff, but I had to learn how to edit audio. I had to learn how to record multi-track. I had to learn how to license music and download that and cut it in and create segments and actually produce an episode, then export that MP3 with the proper settings, and then upload that to my podcast host, where then I generate an RSS feed. In the description, you have to upload an image. You take that RSS feed and you plug it into your podcast host, that then distributes it out to all the major players, right? So I had to learn all of that process along the way. And so hardware, recording, production, posting. So here's the hardware. How do we set that up? How do we record an episode? How do we structure the episode? How do we license music? How do we edit? How do we do EQ, compression, denoising? How do you get rid of clicks and ums and uhs and sneezes and all that stuff? What's that process look like? And then export and then upload. So that whole process, I then boiled down to a 4-hour workshop that we called the podcast camp. So you guys familiar with the phrase "one time at band camp"? So it's this whole idea of band camp, or going to camp. Like, we went to soccer camp, we went to whatever camp. And so I thought, let's send people to podcast camp. Like, I went to camp this weekend. What'd you learn to do? I learned how to podcast. And so we hosted a half-day workshop. That was in April. And so I hosted one. And this is what I really want to maybe hammer down on this whole scenario. I thought, if I have the knowledge to do this for myself, I could possibly teach others to do that. What would it look like if I hosted a workshop? And then I thought, let me just host one. Let me host one workshop. Let me get the one and see how it goes, and then see where it goes from there. What's going to happen? If I just do the one, how can this grow? What's the potential? How can this evolve? And so I partnered with The Hive, which is a co-working space in Wichita, Kansas, in downtown. and worked with Andrea there. She's really amazing. And so she put out an exclusive email to her people to say, hey, Jason's coming in and hosting this workshop. If any of you want to learn how to podcast, it's going to be $79, whatever, $75 for Hive members. Gave them a break. And so she sent that out to her email list, and I had 2 people sign up. And at first I was like, oh man. And then I thought, no, you know what? I'm getting one. We're going to do one. And so I put together all these materials. Everybody came into the workshop, and I had microphones, XLR cables, mixer, boom arms, and then I had my computer, and then we had a TV. And so when people came in, I said, I'm going to teach you what all this stuff is, teach you what it does. We're going to plug it all in, turn it all on. We're going to do a 10-minute episode. I'm going to answer your questions that you have about podcasting. Then I'm going to show you how to edit that. And then we're going to export it and upload it. And it's going to be live on Apple Podcasts. And so within 4 hours, I taught them that entire process from start to finish. And when we left, there was an episode on my podcast camp feed of this, of how to do this. And so essentially what happened there was I hosted one, 2 people showed up, and I thought, you know what? I don't know that was as successful as I wanted it to be. And so I was really considering just, maybe I'll do something else or figure out another venue or figure out another way to teach people how to podcast. And I got an email from someone. They said, hey, I missed your podcast camp. When's your next one? And I thought, okay, that's enough for me to schedule a next one. So I had 10 spots. I opened up a morning for 4 hours and sent out the email to the Hive, and we filled up. We had 10 people buy all the tickets. And I was stoked. I was like, this is awesome. Let's go. And so then I got another email, and someone said, hey, I just tried to sign up for your workshop, and there are no more tickets left. When's your next one? And then I said, if I open an afternoon spot, will you commit to buy the ticket? They said, absolutely. Open the afternoon spot, and then that one sold out. So I did the one. I had 2 people. Somebody said, hey, I felt like that would have been valuable to me. I couldn't make it. When's your next one? And then all of a sudden I have 20 people. I'm like, this is great. So then I taught 20 people that entire process, went through that workshop. And that was like fall 2019. And we all know what happened March 2020. And so this was an example of me getting experience, learning how to do something, and then offering it to somebody else as a service. And that's really what I want to hammer down. And that's what I learned when I was in college. I went to the Art Institute of Houston, and I got a 2-year degree in graphic design, so an associate degree. And as soon as I got out of school, I got a full-time job as a graphic designer for a minor league hockey team in Houston, where it's hot and it doesn't make sense, but there was hockey there. So I did that for 4 years there. But the entire 4 years that I was there, I was freelancing and doing photography, building websites, doing graphic design on the side, offering all of the services based on the skill set that I possessed. And so it started very early in my career. And so maybe that resonates with some of you, maybe it doesn't, but I just want to make it just crystal clear. Whatever skill set you possess, you really can use it to help solve other people's problems. And so hosted the podcast camp, and that was a lot of fun. I wanted to keep doing it, but COVID hit and things changed and everything changed. And so let me just show one more slide here. This was part of the podcast camp and some of the content that we talked about in the very beginning. But anymore these days, it's not just about podcasting. Like, let's just take some audio, put that on Spotify, iTunes, whatever, and then let people listen. It's now about pushing that content into different forms to different places. Now, I would add video podcast, because if you shoot video, you've got video and audio. Strip the audio, send that to your podcast player, but now take your video, throw that on YouTube, wherever. You can live stream that whole process. You can even export your video and through OBS mimic a live stream to a social media platform. But then you can take that and now you clip it out and send it to social. So now you've got Reels, TikToks, stories, whatever. And then you have clips that you can put on a website. So if in your podcast you end up talking about some service you provide or something that you do, or whatever you're talking about answers a question that a potential client or customer of your services may have, you can now use that as educational, informational for potential customers on your website. Does all that make sense? You guys following here? Anybody have any questions about anything I've said so far? No? Let me just keep going. We're good? Okay. All right, good. Take all that and throw it on landing pages. Anymore you can send text notifications. Like there are services where you can sign up and say, hey, I've got a new episode live, which is like right to their messenger. So even if they have notifications to where your YouTube channel posted a new video or your episode went live on Apple, that's in a big list of notifications. But now you can send directly to text. You have to pay for that, but now it's in their text inbox, and I'm more likely to check a text than I am to look at a notification on my screen. That's in a long list of notifications. And then just another thing, sending that to email. So there's a whole world of content that you can create when you start with your long form content, and then you cut that down into smaller pieces and send it all over the place so that people have access to it in different platforms, right? So that's part of what we talked about in the camp. I thought that was valuable information maybe for you guys. 2 questions.
I'm coming. Start with Jordan.
How did you not necessarily monitor or work with your workflow? Because those all seem like different, not websites, but like platforms that you're having to pull from all the time instead of having it in one concise place that sprouts out. Like you can do with your social media, like there's different apps that you can use that links all of them together.
Oh, right. Yeah, no, that's a good question. It's labor intense, truly. Are you thinking about maybe an app that helped kind of with that workflow?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's different, I know of some CRMs. What's that? It's customer resource management or something like that?
I think customer resource management.
Yeah, where you can link and sync all of your different platforms, and so if you post here, it posts there, that different kind of thing. But if I'm talking about this, it really does it takes hands-on a lot of times to reformat stuff to go into these different places. But let's just say you take a video podcast and you drop that into YouTube. Well, then you grab your link and you embed that into your website. And then as you're putting together an email newsletter, you link the YouTube link. So it's kind of already created. You just have to manually place it in different platforms to put it out. Does that make sense? Kind of help? Yeah? Okay. One more.
You can actually pass that back to her.
Yeah, I just was curious because I'm not really so, I don't know a lot about like this kind of terminology. Could you like loosely define what landing pages are?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so with a web page or website, you have your main page and then you have your sub pages. Your navigation bar, you click and there's different pages. Specifically in marketing, if you create a landing page, you're going to tie that landing page to some sort of link that you've put out on the web, wherever, as a form or a source of tracking to see where that traffic has come from. So if you come across my Facebook feed and it says, go to this link. Have you ever seen a bit.ly link? B-I-T, yeah. So it's a tracking link. And so then you can tie that link to a landing page on your website that's it's in your website, but it's independent of your other analytics. So then it just helps you track. So I know that if somebody came to landing page A and they all came from Facebook, I can see that 40 clicks happened on this landing page. Right? Does that make sense? Yeah. It's just a way of tracking. Yeah. So, okay. Moving on. Moving right along. Where are we at? 11:27. You guys good? Yep. Let's go. I'm trying to power through this. So, March 2020. Any normal month until mid-March, and things changed. Everything changed. And so I was working for a company doing videography, and on a Friday, they're like, you got to go home and you're going to have to work from home from now on. I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. And so set up shop at home, doing my normal thing. But having been the podcast guy in 2019 from hosting the workshops and kind of marketing myself that way, I started getting a lot of emails and messages of people saying, hey, I need a webcam. My company's making me use this platform called Zoom so I can get in on meetings. I need a good microphone. I need some good lighting. I need a good video camera. Hey, we're going to start a podcast. We need to create content. We have to stay relevant because the world has gone to crap. And so having gotten all those questions, I mean, maybe once or twice a day and skip a day and then somebody asked me. And so I'm writing all these emails, pulling all these links from Amazon, doing all this research, sending people this information. And I thought, you know what would be really great is if I built a website that would answer everybody's questions that they have about podcast gear, live streaming gear, webcam, ring lights, video cameras, whatever. And so being the little bit of an SEO guy that I am, everybody familiar with SEO? Okay. I thought, you know what? What if I built a website that used a keyword search as a URL? All right. And so I came up with this keyword, podcast gear for beginners, because people want to know, how do I start? What's the easiest way to go? So I built this website, Podcast Gear for Beginners, and I just started writing blogs. Podcast setup for one, solo setup, 2-person, 3-person, 4-person, and I'm grabbing images off of Amazon. I set up an Amazon affiliate account. You guys familiar with affiliate links? All right. Set that up so that if someone clicks and buys, I make $1.20 or 85 cents, but it adds up over time, right? And so I built this website, and you guys can check it out, podcastgearforbeginners.com. I really haven't touched it. I haven't written any new content since probably 2021, and it just continues to live on and get traffic and get clicks. But it is also a big source of traffic for my podcast table shop business. We'll get to that in a second. And so, again, it's the idea of taking my knowledge and my understanding of podcasting equipment, video equipment, lighting, microphones, whatever, and writing blogs, and very basic blogs. This is this kind of mic that you can use for this, and you need this kind of cable to plug in to this type of unit, and then you're linking people so they can see what you're talking about and see how much it costs. And so I even have some blogs that are like starting a podcast for under $200. Your first camera for $1,000, that kind of stuff. You guys have seen this content. It exists all over YouTube and everywhere because people are searching for this kind of stuff. So podcast gear for beginners, again, taking my knowledge and figuring out how can I monetize what I know how to do, but also help others. So about the time that I'm doing keyword research for podcastgearforbeginners.com, I find one day that the keyword podcast tables is underserved in relevant search results. So I'm looking up podcasts because I'm looking at podcast gear, podcast mics, podcast recorders, trying to find all the keywords that people are searching, and then writing blogs to try and rank for those keywords. Mind you, at this time, so it was April 2020, I built this website. In September, I'm already first page of Google for podcast gear for beginners or podcast equipment for beginners. First page of Google. So that's a big deal if you know anything about SEO. And I'm like, this is awesome. So I'm trying to research and figure out, I need more blogs, I need more content, I need more relevant keyword search results. And so I find that podcast table is underserved, and there's not really anything showing up except for a company in the United Kingdom that was building podcast or essentially audio recording desks primarily for radio. And so I'm like, this is what I call a hole in the market. There's not really anything that's coming up, and I think that's rare in this world because everybody's thought of everything at this point, it feels like. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to write a blog, and I'm going to see if I can rank it for podcast tables. And so I wrote a blog called DIY Podcast Table Ideas. And all I did was take a picture of what my conference table looked like when I first bought it, and then what it looked like after I modified it for our podcast scenario. And then I just told people what I did. Like, put on a tablecloth, drilled some holes, used some clips, blah, blah, blah. Here's what I did. If you check it out later, you scroll down, I link to anything that I used in making this a thing. And I had another example of how I took another conference table and modified it. And so I write this blog. I'm very particular about the keywords that I use and all that stuff. And within a couple weeks, it's ranking for podcast tables. First page of Google. I'm like, I did it again. I figured something out here. This is really amazing. And so I started getting a lot of traffic on this blog. A lot. And I mean, thousands of clicks. And I'm like, this is doing really well. People are searching for podcast tables. And so then I thought, well, why don't I link them to some tables on Amazon that I think would be good for podcasting? So then I gave like 4 options and updated the blog. And then I started making money off of people buying the tables that I suggested. And I started thinking, man, people are really looking for something. They are looking for a product that is either called a podcast table or it can be used for podcasting, whatever it is. And then I started having the idea, I probably ought to develop a product to sell to the people who are looking for what they can't find. And that's just part of who I am. I'm a problem solver. I'm like, what do I do? How do I do this? I'm already in the business of modifying tables to fit how I need them to fit, or building something from scratch to try and make it work and look and be a certain way. And so from that whole world, we then have the business Podcast Table Shop is born. And so I had a friend who saw that I had attempted to build a podcast table, and I think out of pity, he offered to build me one. And he said, hey, I love your show. I'm a woodworker. Would you like for me to build a table for you? And I said, well, how about you build 4? He's like, what do you mean? I was like, I have a design. Here's a design. So I sent him just a little line drawing of these wedge shapes. And he brought that idea to life. This is not the one that he built. This is, again, the evolution. We started with version 1. And there's version 2, version 3. So now we have version current. And the idea here was that we were going between 2 to 3 to 4 guests, and I thought if I had a modular system where I could add and remove pieces, that would be fantastic. And as I was researching podcast tables, some of the searches that were coming up were the half moon tables, so like the half circle tables. And I thought, I don't like that, I don't like the way it looks, and I also don't want to have to cut circles. It's easier to cut this way than it is to cut this way. So I was trying to really create some ease there. And so we came up with this design, and the first iteration was born. And having podcastgearforbeginners.com, I already had a platform where people were searching what they couldn't find, searching for what they couldn't find, but then finding me. And then our first iteration, we put a blog called Podcast Tables for Sale. And then we featured the product. I put some keywords in there, and that started ranking, and we started selling tables. Eventually, March 2022, so 2 years post-COVID, I registered the business Podcast Table Shop, LLC, and I got my EIN, and I got a bank account, and I started building these tables for customers out of my garage. And so after the guy who built my first table, he took on a couple orders for me. Didn't really work out so well, so then eventually I learned how to build these, and I wasn't a woodworker. And so again, it's an idea of solving a problem for myself, designing something for myself, learning something for myself, and then growing that and seeing that evolve into a business. And so now, Can't remember if I showed you guys that or not, but that was that picture from earlier. But then now we have different versions of our tables where we do different colors, different accessories, different leg styles. And so obviously this is a little more chic, whatever, brighter area here. But someone asked me to custom build this table and if they could change the colors of everything. So I did that for them. And then once I did that for them, I just launched this as what we now call our champagne oak. We're fancy, right? Champagne. I mean, I had to have a glass of champagne at that table. So champagne oak. But we have different versions now. We have like a black table, a gray table. We've got dark wood, light wood, all different kinds of stuff. And so that business has grown. And I thought, well, you know what? If I know how to record, edit, build tables, run a studio, live stream, produce, do all the things, why not offer that to people also? And so that was when Podcast Solutions was born. And so actually, she asked me earlier what came first. Podcast Solutions came first before the tables because I was already doing editing and production for companies in town without a physical location. But then eventually said, let's rent a space, let's put a studio in. And so now we have fully functioning, full service podcast studio where we do as little or as much as you want us to do. And so our biggest client right now records about 6 episodes a month. And we do a 3-camera setup where we run our switcher and we edit that into episodes that go on YouTube and onto their website. And then we cut clips, promo clips that go on their Instagram, their TikTok, and their Facebook. And yeah, that's what we do now with Podcast Solutions. And I think maybe I have one more picture here. Yep, and that's some of our clients having a good old time talking about how to buy and sell a business successfully. So what can you podcast about? You can podcast about anything. Anything that you're passionate about, anything that you know a lot about or want to learn about, or anything that, I mean, you don't have to podcast for anybody. Podcast for you and your friends because you like doing it. It makes you laugh and it's a good time. And if the world never hears it, well then too bad, but it's a shame because I bet it'd be great. So these guys doing their podcast about their lawyer office. And so right now what I see in the industry is, and I like to brag about this. Can I brag? Is that okay? Can I be proud? At the podcast camp, I was talking to a group of business owners, and I said, Wichita seems to always be behind a little bit in media production, content creation, all that stuff. I remember when live streaming was a big deal, and we're trying to tell business owners to live stream, and then you got to do this, you got to do that, you have to do all these things, and if you're a business and you want to compete in the marketplace, you really have to be creating content. You have to be doing outbound marketing and inbound marketing and all these things, getting your website up to snuff, your socials up to snuff, telling people what you do, answering everybody's questions in blogs and video and all these different things. And so you have to be this way to compete. And so I'm talking to these business owners saying this in 2019, and I said, listen, in the next couple of years, businesses are going to be using podcasting as a way to acquire customers and to educate customers on the services that they provide. And then lo and behold, COVID hits and that becomes a catalyst for businesses to really get it together and start pushing out, creating as much content as they can. Who are my clients for our studio? Who are my clients or my customers for podcast tables? Businesses and organizations who are putting money into studios, in-house studios, so they can do production on site. And so educational institutions who are teaching students how to podcast and create content, but also law offices, real estate offices, like insurance, financial advisors, like you name it, roofing companies, roofing companies, any business you can think of, plumbing companies. I mean, there's just so many different podcasts out there, and it's no longer just something that hobbyists are doing to talk about their love for, Dungeons and Dragons or, the newest Switch game, whatever. I mean, that's what people do. And people are niching down. Do you guys say niche or niche? Okay, I have two different phrases. I say niche down, niche. Get a niche, but niche down. It doesn't make sense to me, but that's how I say it. So whatever your niche is, you can podcast about that, and you can create content about that, and you can reach a large segment of the population that way, or you can reach a very niche community who actually cares about what you do and what you have to say. So I hope that gives you a little bit of insight into my journey and how everything has kind of just evolved, right? I solve a problem, I want to help solve it for others, which leads into this and that and the other, and then now I have 2 businesses that I help run on a daily basis. That's kind of in the podcasting, or is in the, podcasting space. Question time.
Yes, since you talked about the podcast camp.
Yes.
And how it stopped because of COVID. But now that you have the physical space to show people the entire process from walking into the door to posting it and walking out,
Yeah.
have you thought about starting up camps again, ranging at beginners, intermediate to advanced, and kind of tiering it off since you have the physical space to do it over and over again as much as you want?
No, that's a great question. When we put together the business plan for Podcast Solutions and we looked at renting the space, one of the big things that was a push for us was the opportunity and the space to do the workshops and the education. And I would like to say that it's on the way, but I've been so busy with the shop that it's just kind of been off the table. Like I've really had to pick and choose, right? So one thing is really doing well and one thing is just kind of moving along. Well, the thing that's doing really well, that really is my livelihood for my family, I have to put as much time and attention there. So that's where I've been. But we did sit down and say, oh yeah, the education is going to be a big deal. We can teach people everything and anything. Like one of the things I wanted to do is a workshop called Adobe Creative for podcasters. And then just show the process of how I've created a logo or a graphic in Illustrator, pull into Photoshop and then make this graphic, and then you record and then drop something into Premiere, but then you go to After Effects and animate something and bring that in and throw like there's this whole process where you can use these different Adobe platforms to help you launch your show. And so really like 101 type stuff, real simple. I'm not very advanced in any of these programs. I have what I consider to be a very basic understanding of all the programs, but I've learned to use it specific to how I need it. And I think that that's the power of the programs. You can be super advanced or you can be very basic. And I think that Adobe's really powerful to help people podcast and cut videos and add captions and do all those things. And it's simple. You just need someone to teach you how to do it. So yeah, I would love to get back into that space. I'll have to think about that as I leave here today.
A lot of content creators have been migrating from video-first platforms, and from what it seems like you do at your business, you're also introducing a lot of people to podcasts for the first time. Do you teach them the non-tangible skills of how to create content for an audio-first platform? Where like a lot of the struggles from video-first is that they'll be interacting with objects, photos, video, media on the podcast and not describe what they're doing. And so it feels like you're listening into someone's conversation from another room rather than actually hearing a podcast.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. We have done, so we don't have any kind of formal teaching or coaching, but as we have people come into the studio and we record for them, we produce for them, they inevitably will ask, how was that? And we'll say, it's great, and if I could give you some feedback, instead of saying it's great, but, because then they think it's not great. It's great, and let me give you some feedback. And so there are times where we have to address things like that. But I think people kind of instinctively know if they're doing audio only and they're making a face or doing something silly, if somebody who's kind of, what's the word, intellectually aware, they'll say. What Joe's doing right now is making this funny thing with his hands so that those of you who are listening can have an idea of what's going on right now. So yeah, there does need to be some of that coaching for sure. Does that answer the question? Yeah. Anybody else?
Going to the back. I'll let you hold it, Jordan.
Where are we at?
I kind of just want to know your motivation for why you did. Sorry. What was your motivation in the beginning when you were not as well known and nobody?
That's a great
really
question.
listened?
Truly just doing what I was passionate about and what interests me. I think that's where it all started. Hey, I'm interested in this. I'd like to do this. I think this would be a good idea. I think this could be fun. But also, maybe it's just a personality thing. I don't know. That's a really great question. Just I like to be a problem solver. I'm a gearhead. Like I love technology and mics and cables and video cameras and all those different things. I mean, I was a photographer at one point, and so when the people I worked for came to me and said, "Hey, can you research a camera that we can use to shoot sports photography?" I didn't know anything about sports photography, and so Google became my best friend, and then you just start researching, and so you just find out this is a good camera, but there's a better camera, but then there's a better camera, but then 4K, 6, 8K, 8-bit, 10-bit, 12-bit, 14-bit, like it just keeps going, and so I just got interested in the process and the equipment and all these different things and the potential. You just see it grow. And so I'm kind of that guy, though. Maybe you call it the entrepreneurial spirit, but I can't sit still. I'm always on to next. Currently, we're developing a prototype for a different style of desk that uses a different material that we could possibly mass produce and then essentially bring the cost down and hit a new customer base. And so I just am always, what's next? It's just kind of who I am. Thank you for asking.
Just going to pass it through. Thank you.
So I kind of have a two-parter. The first is that, do you have have you noticed any evolution in your time doing podcasts in podcasts as a medium? Has there been shifts that you've noticed? And then the second part is the joke is, well, we should start a podcast, and everyone talks about wanting to start a podcast, and business are starting podcasts. Do you ever get worried that there's going to be, in 10 years, an oversaturation of the market, or do you foresee this as being something that has some longevity to it?
Yeah, that's so those are great questions. Will the market become oversaturated? I think it already is. That's why I think having a niche is so important. And that's how it is in marketing anything. Who's your target audience, and how do you work the funnel, right? You get a bunch of people into the funnel, but then there are certain variables that determine whether or not that person's a good fit for your product, or your company, or your community. And so how do you pinpoint the people that you really want to reach? I like, let's just say, I don't know, I like movies, but I really like movies that market with the pink color. I really like Barbie. Do you like Barbie? So I've just gotten rid of a bunch of people, but I've also just captured a bunch of people. And I think that's how podcasting will stay relevant, is not to try and do a super broad conversation. I just want to talk about whatever and have my friends on. And I mean, that's cool if you want to do that, but there's a lot of that happens. And so what people are doing now is really finding that niche and then going after it. Have I seen an evolution in podcasting? What was the question? In the way it's kind of just...
Just over the years, especially, I guess COVID is a really good example of what is typical for a podcast, or what are they about, or
Yeah.
who's doing them.
Sure. Yeah. I think the best way for me to answer this question, I hope it hits what you're talking about, is I have seen podcasting go from just audio to now video, but then from video to really bite-sized clips that are now on Reels and TikTok. And it's amazing what Instagram and TikTok has done for podcasting, because before you just kind of threw your audio out into a sea of audio and hoped that people found you, or you already had a network or a community where you served that podcast, and then you got listens within the group, and then word of mouth comes into play. And so whenever I talk to people about starting podcasts, I always say, start with the people you know, friends and family and coworkers. And then one of the ways to kind of expand your network is to get other people on your show who have a large network. And so then you can cross-pollinate networks. So friends and family, use your network. And then to reach people you've never heard of and you don't know, you either have to pay to run ads, or you use social media and you're very strategic about your content, your hashtags and your descriptions and all that stuff. And I think that's where TikTok and Instagram has really served content to audiences that we really didn't think we'd ever reach. And so it's kind of cool. We've seen one of our clients, it's not a big number in the grand scheme of like TikTok and things, but we had one of their videos. They have 188 followers, but they had 14.1K views or something like that. So 14,000 views for only 188 followers. We did something right in the algorithm. And that's mind-boggling to me, right? Because even if you have 188 followers and you serve them a piece of content, not all of them see it. So then to get something that's 400x, 400 times that, is like really amazing, right? So I think if anybody's going to be, if someone's going to start a podcast and really want to reach people beyond their network, they're going to have to leverage social media for sure. Yes.
You talked earlier about being like local, and a lot of your marketing strategies include huge platforms like TikTok, Instagram, and so it's just hard to imagine that people from a specific community happen to see that on their TikTok page, for example. So
Sure. How
how do you market to a specific community in, say, the Wichita area?
Yeah, that's a great question. So again, with the podcast tables business, we've only had 2 local clients at this point. And so I think people in Wichita are finding us, but the majority of the people who want that product are out of state, and that's totally fine. With the studio, really what I think needs to happen is what I just talked about, using our network and then the network of others. And again, because of time constraints in life, we've not really put a lot of emphasis behind networking. So it's like grassroots marketing. Get in front of groups of people, go to A Million Cups, be a guest speaker at somebody's BNI group, sign up with Weeba or be part of the chamber, whatever it is, and then use network. So what we found has worked really well is, as our clients are coming into the studio, we take pictures and then we have them share those pictures on their platform. It's like, hey, it's recording day, blah, blah, blah. And it's just it's just photos, really, not a lot of video. But then people see that and they're like, what are you doing? Where is that? What's that place called? And so I'll go in and I'll comment and say, hey, we're Podcast Solutions. Let me know if you need anything, whatever it is. Super grassroots. The other thing is we could run ads and run local ads, but we also rank organically for podcast studios in Wichita, Kansas. And so it's just a matter of people having a need and finding us on Google, or it being kind of word of mouth kind of scenario. I like all the questions. Thank you, guys. I'm not standing up here looking weird.
Okay, so I don't really know much about podcasting. So is like the average person really able to make a living on this, or do you just need to be like, is it only the really famous people, like the big podcast people, or
Yeah.
how's that work?
I mean, if you're famous, it helps, right? That always helps. But, you say average person, like I know of some guys. Again, I think it all boils down to what value are you adding? And I think that as you grow and learn and gain experience and you garner skill sets and those kinds of things, if you're adding value to other people who are maybe in your same part of your journey or maybe a little bit behind you and they can learn something from you, I think then you really have a good foundation to be able to make money through a podcast. So I know a couple guys in town who are wedding videographers, and they started a podcast about how to shoot a wedding video. And they're just talking about what equipment they use and what the day of shooting is like, and how they edit, what's their workflow. They're just the problems they solve for themselves. In their podcast, they're telling other people what they've done. Well, then they launched a course, and they said, hey, we're going to teach you our workflow. We're going to teach you how to do this. We're going to create resources that we're going to give to you, and you're going to pay us $1,499 per course. And those guys are making a couple $100,000 a year from podcasting, but also now creating the educational content that comes along with it. And so average guys shooting weddings have now taken their knowledge and their education, and they're making a living off of it. And so I think, yeah, that the average person can, but again, you have to really hammer down on what is the value that I bring, who is the community that I can add value to, and are they, have I created a product or whatever it is that they see valuable enough to spend money on, right? One more?
I was curious if you had an opinion or what you thought the podcasting market in Wichita is like. Do you think that it's like a thriving market, or is it like a dead market?
It's a good question. I know of a few podcasts in Wichita. I don't know any that maybe have like a crazy national audience or have monetized quite a bit, but I think in their respective communities and their respective networks, they've brought value and have seen success on some level, maybe not like on a national level, but on a local level for sure. They're business podcasters. I see there are some people in the real estate world right now who are pushing out a ton of content, and it's getting a lot of eyeballs. And I had a realtor come to me and say, hey, I want to start a podcast. And I said, well, let's go. And she said, well, do you work with these specific people? I said, I do not. She said, okay, good. Because she's like, I see what they're doing. I want to do something like it. I want to do something better. I want to make sure that, I don't want to be associated with what they're doing because I want to do my own thing. But it's getting eyeballs to the point to where other realtors are coming in and saying, hey, I see what they're doing. Want a part of it, So. All right. Lunchtime?
We're just about there. Awesome. Thank you, guys. I will echo what Jason said and say thank you for your awesome questions. That always, I know, makes it more fun for the presenter when you've got people talking back to you, and I love seeing you guys be engaged. So thank you, Jason. We appreciate you very much. Yeah. If they have questions for you, are you okay if they reach out to you, email, anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Jason at podcasttables.shop. Check out any of my websites. You can contact me through those.
And your SEO is good, so they'll be able to find you very easily.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.